Just give up already. You're out of ideas. But I'm not. I have plenty of ideas. What is up, guys? So today we are back with another deep dive, diving deeper into the Nightmare Cup, and today we're actually looking at a Pokemon that I was kind of excited for at the turn of the announcement for the Nightmare Cup, but after looking a little bit more into this Pokemon, it's not what I hoped it would have been. So let's actually get into Gardevoir today. So Gardevoir is actually a Psychic and Fairy type Pokemon. Maxing out at level 40 with 15s across the board, you can achieve a 30-93 on the CP, which is fairly huge. It's not really ideal for the Great League, but hey, we know that doesn't necessarily stop everyone. Now, with a 0 on attack, 15 defense, and 15 stamina, at level 18, we can actually hit that 1496, which does allow us to have the most stat product out of our Gardevoir inside of the Great League. According to my spreadsheets and all the numbers that I have ran, Gardevoir should rank around 42nd in bulk and actually 34th in stat product. That spread right there, the difference between those two rankings actually comes a lot from this attack stat. 237 on attack is really, really huge. And that's really, really great, but not so much in PvP. So 195 and 169 on our other two stats are okay, but if this was flopped with maybe that, holy cow, would Gardevoir be amazing. So as far as our moves go, we only actually have 5 moves to choose from with Gardevoir. I do have our moves color-coded here for the stab effect. So let's actually go over Charge Beam first at 3.67 energy per turn, a 1.67 damage per turn. Of course, we don't get the stab bonus since it is an electric type move. Confusion here, 3 energy per turn for 4 damage per turn, but after stab it does go up to this 4.8, which is really nice. Dazzling Gleam being our fairy move here, costing 70 for 110 damage at a 1.57 damage per energy ratio is pretty good. After we factor in stab, it does go up to 132 for a 1.88 damage per energy ratio. Psychic here, costing 70 for 100 damage at a 1.43 damage per energy ratio. After you do factor in the stab, it does go up to 120, which makes it a 1.71 damage per energy ratio, which is really nice. And Shadow Ball here, costing 55 for 100 damage at a 1.82, and since it is a ghost type move, we don't get our stab bonus from that. So out of all of these moves, I did try a couple of different combinations just to try to give Gardevoir the biggest, I guess, toolkit to work with in each match. In the charge move department, there's really only 2 that make a whole lot of sense here. Dazzling Gleam and Shadow Ball are kind of our 2 better options. So Dazzling Gleam is going to be able to hit those dark types for super effective damage, while Shadow Ball is actually going to be able to hit the psychic types for super effective damage. And then we just kind of have to come down to which one of these do we want to use. Well, I know a lot of people just flat out are going to say Confusion, best moveset, like don't worry, Confusion's best move, I don't want to hear it. And you'd be right. But I do feel like there is a case to be made for Charge Beam. Even though we do abysmal damage, we do actually get a little bit of a bump in our energy per turn here, which kind of helps us get to these moves a little faster. Plus, being that it is Confusion, it is a Psychic type move. It is going to be resisted by a lot of the Pokemon in the cup, so it could be worth it to check out Charge Beam, right? Well, that's actually what I did. So let's actually go over some shielding situations for these 2 movesets. So if you actually run Confusion in a 0 versus 0 or the closing type matchup, I guess, 26.9% of those matchups are actually yours, which is getting pretty low. I mean, we're only beating a 1/4 of the meta. We don't even beat a 1/3 of the meta, which means we don't even beat enough Pokemon to be considered like at least beating a whole typing, which is what you would want. But if you actually go over to Charge Beam, you do actually bump up to 41.8%. which is pretty high. I mean, that's a lot higher than 26.9, so there's merit there. If we're actually using Confusion in the 2 versus 0, so when I have 2 shields and my opponent doesn't have any shields, we actually end up winning 83.6. So we're not actually too worried about that 83.6% of Pokemon. We actually want to know the other side of it and figure out if I have 2 shields, which Pokemon are just going to flat out beat me whenever I have complete shield advantage. And the dark types are the ones that we're worried about here. Now, if you actually switch over to Charge Beam, it does boost up to 97%. So almost every Pokemon in the cup is going to have a problem. The only Pokemon that we actually end up losing to with Charge Beam here are Shiftry and Nuzleaf, actually. So they carry a resistance to our Charge Beam, which makes a lot of sense. And we don't have too much to actually hit them for super effective damage. So... Moving on to our 0 versus 2 shield situation here. So when I don't have any shields and my opponent actually has 2 shields, I'm actually worried about which ones we do win here. But since the opponent actually has complete shield advantage, it'd be nice to know which ones we don't have to have shields to actually win against. Well, when you're using Confusion, you actually win 16.4% of these matchups, and most of those matchups are the fighting types, which isn't a super big surprise, considering that fighting is going to be weak to the psychic move here. When we switch over to Charge Beam, though, a big old goose egg. 0%. That's unfortunate. Moving on to our 2 versus 2 shields, or the mock-up like opening type situation. With Confusion, you actually do win 34.3%, which, that's okay, but what it ends up telling you is that Gardevoir actually does prefer to open here. It does win more matches as an opener rather than a closer. And then with Charge Beam, it actually flops to the opposite. We actually go to 16.4 with our opening situation, so we end up preferring to close a lot more. So what does this tell us? Well, I definitely say Confusion is more of a specialized situation, while Charge Beam is definitely more of a general spread, but Charge Beam is just, like, I don't know, like, it still wins quite a few matches, but it just doesn't feel like Gardevoir whenever you use the Charge Beam without Confusion. Like, I don't know, it's awkward. So on average, if you actually take all of these numbers and average out the percentages here, with Confusion, we do end up having better averages amongst all situations. We actually end up with a 40.3% win ratio amongst all 4 of those situations. Whereas if we took the Charge Beam, even though there are some higher numbers, that 0% really kills us. We actually only end up averaging 38.8. So I would definitely say that Confusion is the safer bet. If you're a gambling man and you just want to be crazy, Charge Beam may be more up your alley though. But for the purposes of this video, we did go with Confusion to actually run these matchups and figure out some other stuff about Gardevoir, which let's actually get into. Now, I do want to let you know that all of the situations on this board are run in a 1v1 shield scenario situation to try to give the most evenness to both Pokemon. Well, in all of my deep dives, I actually end up taking our subject Pokemon, Gardevoir today, and I put them up against the top 10 bulkiest Pokemon. Gardevoir actually ends up in a really odd spot here. So we actually only end up winning against Wobbuffet. So Umbreon, Hypno, Claydol we do end up tying against, but I still consider that a loss considering we lost our Pokemon. Bronzong actually does end up losing both scenarios, whether it has Feint Attack or whether it has Confusion. Alolan Raticate, Matang, Slowbro, Slowking, and Grumpig here all just end up beating us. And it's crazy because that's all of our dark types that are in the top 10 and most of the psychic types that are in the top 10. Well, that's crazy. It's like we don't win against most of the psychics. We don't win against the darks. Yeah, so this section is actually meant to be what should we actually be focusing attention on either with our Gardevoir or against a Gardevoir. If we actually have a Gardevoir here, we want to be focusing a lot of our attention onto the fighting types. So Lucario is actually the only loss that we actually carry in the fighting types, which is okay, I guess. Lucario's, you know, gonna resist a lot of the psychic damage. We still actually end up winning against the majority of the fighting types. But if we're actually gonna bring something to combat the Gardevoir, we actually can bring just a lot of the psychic types. So the only psychic types that we actually end up doing okay against are Kadabra, Gallade, Wobbuffet, and Drowsy. Now there are a couple of ties here, being Claydol, which we talked about a little earlier, Espeon, and Spoink. Yeah, we tie against a Spoink. From there, it goes downhill. Mr. Mime, Girafarig, Smoochum even beats us. Execute, Alolan Raichu, you know, all the Pokemon that we've talked about before. which ends up being really awkward because we don't have a really good chance up against our own typing here. Even though we do carry Shadow Ball, we still just end up just losing to a lot of the Pokemon that are faster than us. We start to lose to these fast Pokemon, meaning we only end up beating the slower Pokemon than Gardevoir. And then we actually have our dark types here. So the dark type matchup is pretty abysmal. With our dual typing, we don't gain anything in resistance to that dark type move. So yeah, Absol is even our best bet. At worst, we will actually come not even close to beating Absol. We're still gonna lose. But, I mean, every single dark Pokemon on here is just wrecking us. Umbreon and Alolan Raticate are the worst threats for us. Shiftry also ranks really high. Just a ton of neutral damage or a ton of just super effective damage to combat the psychic typing that we carry. Really makes it hard for Gardevoir to stand a chance in these matchups. So now let's actually look at a couple of pros and cons for our Gardevoir here. I only have one for each. So my con for Gardevoir is that it looks really nice from the outside looking in. So it has Shadow Ball, it has Dazzling Gleam, it has Confusion. Like, holy cow, this is amazing. Yeah, but once you get into the numbers, it's not as impressive. And I honestly do think that it comes from having this extremely high attack stat. Because of this attack stat and the way the CP formula works, we end up just being extremely squishy. We have hardly no bulk, and we can't tank any damage really whenever we go up against a Pokemon that's threatening to us. So from the outside it does actually look really nice, but after looking into a lot of these matchups, I'm not too sold on Gardevoir. But for our pro, I actually do have written down that it could be a decent specialist. While it's not super bulky, it can hold on to a couple of the matchups, especially in the fighting type matchups. It does do okay for a lot of those. It's just that it's kind of a risk versus reward thing. It could be pretty good against the fighting types, but honestly think there are better ones out there. It can carry that fairy type move, which can do some neutral damage to other types in the cup. But, I mean, it's just not, I don't know, it's risk versus reward for me. It's not enough of a reward for the risk of carrying the Gardevoir when the numbers are this low in a lot of these situations. I'm just not sold on it. So that is actually it for Gardevoir today, guys. Thank you so much for hanging out. Hopefully you guys had some insight for Gardevoir, because this was one of the higher rated ones. Unfortunately, I'm not behind it. I can't recommend Gardevoir. I feel like there are way better psychic types. There are way better psychic generalists. There are way better psychic specialists. I just, Always remember that if you have a deep dive idea, make sure to comment it down below. I'll put it in the spreadsheet and we'll try to get to it as quickly as we can. I do tend to prioritize the Pokemon that have higher votes, but I definitely wouldn't be opposed if I hear a really nice Pokemon that, you know, not a lot of people are talking about. Definitely be interesting in looking into it. So, thank you guys so much for watching. Remember that if you like to like videos, you can do that, but if you don't, you can be that guy. Otherwise, let me know what you have to say down in those comments below. And until our next video, I will catch you then.